Hey Unwrappers, Olly here. Just before we get going, let me tell you about the Week magazine's summer sale. It is the perfect excuse to relax and reflect on the last 7 days. With news and opinion curated from over 200 trusted sources, the Week magazine will leave you feeling fully informed on the issues that matter. Subscribe by August the 21st to receive 6 free issues of the Week. Plus, for a limited time, you'll also receive free access to the digital edition and save a huge 61% after your trial. It's our best offer yet. Visit theweek.co.uk/offer and enter the code SUMMER to claim this special offer today. That's theweek.co.uk/offer and the code SUMMER. And now, on with the show. It's the week ending Saturday the 13th of August, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the FBI raiding the Florida home of former President Donald Trump, 23 times Grand Slam winner Serena Williams announcing her retirement from tennis, and the death from cancer of actress and singer Dame Olivia Newton-John at the age of 73. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from The Week magazine, it's Leif Arbuthnot. From the refugee podcast Integrate That, it's Abdulwahab Tahhan. And from the Spectator's Chinese Whispers podcast, it's Cindy Yu. And Cindy, last time you were here, the Prime Minister resigned. Assuming you don't trigger any massive news events this week, I'm hoping that you can stick around for the whole episode this time, if that's okay.
I absolutely can. I can't believe it's been a month. What a crazy month.
A long time in politics, blimey. Right, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Well, this is the week that sanctions against Russia get personal.
There are things you probably didn't quite imagine. Like driving to the nearest island across a frozen sea. Or singing with close to 10% of the population. Or diving into a former Soviet prison. Or wandering through what was once the largest factory in Imperial Russia. Estonia is a fascinating hybrid of Eastern Europe and Scandinavia.
Not your average bucket list destination, a promotional video from Visit Estonia's YouTube channel. Cindy, why are we talking about visiting Estonia?
Because actually, this year, since the Russian invasion, Estonia has been quite popular with Russian tourists. And the reason for that is because direct flights into the EU and into Russia are very hard to come by at the moment. Russian companies, in fact, are not allowed to operate their flights, commercial flights, as part of EU sanctions. So a lot of Russians are driving across the border into Estonia, into Finland, where they actually then go to the rest of their European trip from there. But this week, Estonia and Finland's prime ministers have joined President Zelensky in basically campaigning for the EU to extend sanctions to Russian tourists so that they won't be able to do that anymore. So that essentially the EU is saying to Russian tourists, nope, not coming here.
Yeah, Kaja Kallas, the Prime Minister of Estonia, tweeted on Tuesday, "Visiting Europe is a privilege, not a human right. Air Russia from Russia is shut down. It means that while Schengen countries issue visas, neighbours to Russia carry the burden. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, sole access points." I mean, she's right in identifying the loophole, but is she right to say visiting Europe is a privilege, not a human right? I mean, it may not be a human right, but a privilege is maybe a bit strong. People do expect to be able to travel freely around the world with their passports, unless there's a very compelling reason not to admit them somewhere.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, I think obviously you can always find that reason, but the reason here is obviously because they're holding Russian passports, and that's means that they're somehow complicit in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that's what I find immoral at worst and unsavory at best. And I just think, you shouldn't be punishing ordinary Russian people. And obviously, you might dispute they're not ordinary if they're, traveling around Europe for their summer holidays and that kind of thing. But at the same time, unless they are actually supporting the regime, unless they actually have something to do with the Russian army or the Russian government, why, because of a passport, would you just say to a certain people, you can't have this thing? We absolutely hold you responsible for this atrocity that's happening in Ukraine. That seems to me deeply unfair.
Because I suppose, Abdul, that's what all sanctions are, aren't they? They're not just punishing the Russian government, they're punishing all Russian people. That's the purpose, is to try and put pressure on the government to do something different.
Well, if the government really cares about the people, then yes, this would put a lot of pressure on the government because people would get angry, and this will change the trajectory of, I don't know, of electing certain people. But that wouldn't really happen in Russia because it's not like a democracy. We're not talking about a democracy. We're talking about a country run by a dictator who's been at war since 2014. First, the invasion of Crimea, and I would say the invasion of Syria because I'm from Syria. Bombing Syria that started in 2014. Not country really did anything to stop Russia from doing that. During the World Cup in 2018, they were bombing Syria. No country did anything. That we saw politicians flocking to Russia, sat down with Putin, congratulated him, and now they're saying, oh wait, Russia is the bad guy, and we cannot let people to come to Europe. I think it's a little bit too late to stand on any moral ground to sanction the Russian people now. It's a little bit too late.
Do you sense, Leif, that that's going to be the attitude of the wider EU beyond places like Finland and Estonia, that it is too late to do this now? Like, Russian citizens have been travelling within the EU. Why would you put the sanction on now?
No, I mean, I've been reading a lot of the reaction on social media and in the comment section of newspapers. And what I've picked up, at least from sort of, English-speaking people sort of making their views heard on the internet, is overwhelming support for this measure. I think it's a feeling of like, well, why should they have a jolly in Europe when the state is effectively endangering the integrity of Europe itself. So I think that this is a pretty popular measure, and that people will see it as part and parcel of what you mentioned, Olly, which is that the way that sanctions work. Obviously, they're meant to cause unhappiness amongst the general populace in order to kind of ratchet up the pressure on the people at the top. We can have a discussion about whether that's effective, but my gut is that people won't particularly want Russian tourists around. That's, you can see that as quite dangerous.
I mean, under the banner of jolly in Europe, Leif, though, you're including, all kinds of business travel. You're including people going to visit their extended families, people who have families across different European nations. Is that a jolly, or is that now, especially after 2 hard years of COVID, something we should be encouraging, is as much travel as possible to get things back to normal?
No, I mean, for sure, some people will not, be visiting their relatives, for the last time, and that they're going to be all sorts of, if this comes through, there'll be all sorts of horrific stories. And, I do think it's really something to be resisted, is the idea that every Russian person somehow bears the imprimatur of the sort of sins of Putin. That's completely wrong. And yet, if we're sort of buying into the idea that we have to do more about this invasion than just send weapons over, we have to try and exert soft cultural pressure in other ways, and I think that this, there's a fairly strong argument for this. So yeah, we'll have to see whether this actually goes through, because it seems that it's going to come to they're going to have a discussion about it at the EU in the autumn, and I'm sure that there'll be quite a lot of resistance to it from certain member states. Maybe Italy might object, for instance.
Cindy, what's the reaction from Russia to this so far?
So a Kremlin spokesperson has reacted pretty angrily and said, any attempt to isolate, I'm not going to try a Russian accent, I'm going to read it out. Any attempt to isolate Russia or Russians is a process that has no prospects, Dmitry Peskov said on Tuesday, saying that it displayed an irrationality of thinking that was off the charts. Now, I do agree with that part of the analysis, but I also feel like, the foreign ministry has to say that, because obviously they have to protest any losing of access for their citizens. But also, B, this is quite an effective tool for the Russian government to go back and say, well, look, they're not on your side. We are on your side. We've got to stick together. And actually, there's research to show that that's what sanctions do. When you sanction a country that you deem unsavory, and let's say you cut off trade with it or do whatever it is, those people in some circumstances become more reliant on government handouts, more reliant, more nationalistic possibly, because there's a victimhood narrative going on. And so I think we do have to just consider, what is this actually playing into the hands of it's very nice to have a knee-jerk reaction, to have this kind of release, a catharsis of let's punish all Russians. But does it actually push them into thinking that what Putin is doing is maybe not right, but at least with their interests at mind?
Yes, because the other part of Peskov's statement that perhaps Cindy wasn't prepared to back, Abdul, was the bit where he compared this measure to Nazi Germany. And obviously that's a rhetorical flourish. No one's seriously saying that Estonia and Finland are like Nazi Germany. But it shows how the Russians can use this to play into their own hands, doesn't it? It shows how this measure does. It looks like evidence that Putin's right, that the rest of the world is against them.
Well, they're going to use everything in their hands, as Cindy said, in order to justify the things they're doing. But again, this all goes back to really, do sanctions really work? Are these sanctions really punishing the regime, or are they punishing the people? Just like sanctions the United States had on Iran or Syria, are these punishing the people? Is the rich people who are helping Putin and they are helping the regime in Iran or Syria didn't really get affected. We've seen a number of articles saying that they found a lot of loopholes. They get another company to do their bids and work. So these sanctions don't really work. And if there's one thing we learned from watching Breaking Bad, is that half measures don't work. You got to go all in. So if you really want to stop Russia, go ahead, go all in. Don't just send a couple of AK-47 and a couple of bullets. You got to go all in order to stop. In order to bring peace not only to Europe but also other countries around the world, because Syria is one country and there's a lot of refugees who came to Europe because of Russia's actions.
Easier said than done, though, isn't it, Leif? I mean, no one around the world wants to provoke a wider war with Russia.
Yeah, totally. I think that jumping from this kind of these statements coming out of Estonia and Finland to we should actually go the whole hog and have a proper big war with Russia is a bit of a big jump, to be honest. And I don't know. I think that lots of people will see this as a perfectly reasonable way forward, and also that the idea that Europe should just stand by as one of its countries is invaded, and that we should just carry on merrily trading with them in a normal way and taking their tourists euros will not sit well with people. So there's a large amount of support for this kind of thing.
Yeah, but we're still buying their oil, Leif, aren't we, as Europe? That's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true, and I think that's that it's a bit of an indictment on the kind of energy policy the last 20 years. There's been a clip going around this week of Nick Clegg in sort of 2011-ish time saying, "Oh, there's no point building nuclear power stations because they'll only come on stream in 2021, 2022, which is exactly sort of when we need them." So it's a very complicated issue, but I think it's important not to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater on this story, and to kind of keep a sense of perspective as well.
Yeah, but it's easy to accuse people of tokenism, isn't it, Cindy? You can't come here as a tourist. It's not going to really affect the bottom line of our country, but stopping taking your oil massively would.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a convenient thing to do. What's quite funny is this phenomenon where Putin's also threatening to turn off the oil, but also the EU is threatening to also turn off the oil, but nobody wants the other side to do it first. So we've got this kind of like weird fight going on. I just wanted to add one thing that hasn't really been mentioned so far is just what this means for when it comes to Russophobia of Russians themselves, the racism that they experience. In London, for example, there's a Russian restaurant in Soho called Zima, and the owner of that restaurant has spoken very powerfully on a rival podcast, if I may mention, the Guardian's podcast, about what it has been like for him as a Russian in London since the invasion, because he's had his restaurant vandalized. He's had people boycotting him. He actually employs quite a lot of Ukrainians in his kitchen. So, I mean, it's just, A, culture is not so, distinct, but also B, why should individual Russians be on the receiving end of this kind of exclusion because of something that they had no say over? That I find is deeply concerning.
Yeah, I mean, that is an issue, isn't it, Abdul? Sort of wolf whistling on Twitter, if you're the leader of a developed nation, that, you should block any particular person from coming to your country, inevitably will lead, in some cases, to at least harassment of those individuals when people spot them about. You're going to get tourists having confrontations because, oh, look, the people over there are Russian.
Yeah, we've seen that before. We've seen that happen not only to Russians, we've seen that happen to Polish people after Brexit and Romanians because of Nigel Farage's comments. We've seen that happen in New York in a couple of states of after COVID with Asian hate. So this is a common feature of, a group of people get targeted for something they have never done. And then you would need people from their community to come out and say, hey, listen, we've got nothing to do with that. And we've seen a lot of people from the Muslim community doing that a couple of times. A stupid terrorist does something outrageously stupid and kills a lot of people, and then everyone starts accusing those Muslims who had nothing to do with the actions of specific individual. And this is something, the same concept is happening here. A lot of Russians have nothing to do with that, but as a Syrian, I've learned one thing: hate the regime, don't hate the people. This is the same way it goes for Iran, for Russia, for a lot of different regimes that I personally hate, but not the people themselves, because they have no power over it.
I think what's interesting about this story is that it goes really deep into what we actually want the relationship between, the West and Russia to now be. Like, do we want it to be a sort of iron curtain in which, Russian citizens are sort of, have to stay in their pool, they go to China maybe on holiday and they go to other kind of countries that they're allied with? Or do we want to sort of show them the good life, on the other side of the Iron Curtain, and let them integrate a bit more and see what they're missing by supporting a regime tacitly that's causing damage? And I think it's a really difficult question to answer. It's not something that I know the solution for. What's actually better in the long term is something that we'll have to kind of thrash out over the next few years, if not longer.
Okay, Abdul, I'm coming to you next after this. Okay, Abdul, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is this the week where the content of The Economist will be weighed up in court?
Mesopotamia is an exceedingly fertile plain situated between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. For 5 millennia, this small strip of land situated in what is today Iraq, Kuwait, and Syria fostered innovations that would change the world forever. Inhabited for nearly 12,000 years, Mesopotamia's stable climate, rich soil, and steady supply of fresh water made it ideal for agriculture to develop and thrive.
Ancient Mesopotamia 101 from National Geographic. You can watch the whole thing on YouTube. Abdul, carbohydrates in the Arab world. What is the story?
Love them or hate them, you gotta admit they make them really look good on Instagram. So last week, 2 weeks ago actually, 28th of July, The Economist ran this story about why Arab women are fatter than Arab men and the problem of obesity in Arabic countries. And the photo that was attached to that story was a photo of a very famous Iraqi actress. The article depicts that this is a photo of an unhealthy, fat woman. And the story of this starts with a woman living in Iraq, working like 12 hours a shift to feed her daughters who cannot really go out. And because of cultural stigma, this contributes to women being fatter than men because they're not allowed to go out, they're not allowed to exercise when they grow up. But the problem is they used this photo without permission from the actress, and the actress this week decided to take legal action against The Economist.
Yeah, so this is Inas Taleb, who is very well known in Iraq. She's an actress, she's a talk show host, she has millions of followers on Instagram and all the rest of it. Tell us a bit about her. I mean, because most people listening to this who aren't in the Arab world won't have heard of her.
So Inas Taleb is a very famous actress in Iraq, and between 1996 and 2002, pretty much featured in every single TV drama show, and she was kind of the main character of every one of them. She's a very famous person now in Iraq. She's not really political. She's a figure of that people really like because she's very sweet in person when she talks to people. And she's a nice person, generally speaking. So to see her image being used as an example from the West without her permission, as a bad example for how women look, and then a lot of women, not only on Twitter but only in Arabic countries, started talking about the double standards of the West looking at fat women as a good example to promote body positivity, an example of Lizzo, a very famous singer in the United States, and looking at a very accomplished actress in Iraq and saying, oh, this is not healthy, and this is because of cultural stigma. So there's a lot of misunderstanding in here. I don't know if this is misunderstanding, but there's a lot of problems in this article alone.
I mean, there's a lot of insinuation in what Abdul just said, isn't there, Leif? I mean, I agree. That's a possible interpretation of reading the article, that Taleb is being shown as an example of some of the unhealthy lifestyles that are depicted in the article. But it's not what it says. The Economist piece ends, quote, Iraqis often cite Inas Taleb, an actress with ample curves pictured, as the ideal of beauty. Some claim Iraqi women even take weight-gaining pills to be more attractive to men. It doesn't say she's unhealthy. It doesn't actually say she's fat. So she has ample curves, which, you know, I mean, you can discuss whether we should be judging women's bodies on this kind of scale, but I mean, it's a description that doesn't include the word fat, right?
Yes, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see what the court decides whenever it goes to court, because the piece is about obesity and fatness in the Arab world, and there she is, a sort of banner photo. So just in terms of proximity, it does look fairly incriminating. But as you say, Olly, she's just kind of picked up on the piece as an example of a kind of beautiful person, and no one says, oh, and she, the article doesn't say she must be unhealthy or anything like that. So I'm not quite convinced actually by the argument that she's been kind of picked on as a sort of singled out as an unhealthy person. It's more that she's been singled out as an example of what is considered beautiful in the Arab world and what might be contributing to this absolutely factual BMI gap between men and women in the Arab world, which is pretty acute. And I think that the piece does say some quite interesting things about that. Another thing I want to pick up on, which has been sort of slammed at The Economist, is that The Economist is picking on the Arab world, when actually a kind of cursory glance at The Economist suggests that they're really interested in talking about obesity elsewhere, not least in the US, Mexico, other places. So they're not. It's not like a kind of whenever they talk about obesity, they zero in on Arab countries. Quite the opposite.
And yet, Sindhi, I guess, taking one of Iraq's most famous women and putting that photo in for this article, if it is supposed to be a serious investigation of a serious issue, in itself makes it feel more clickbaity. I know it seems slightly ridiculous to accuse The Economist and publications of really trying to attract the lowest common denominator. But nonetheless, it does feel maybe like you are trying to drive clicks by using someone's image without their consent.
Okay, so a few things to say about this. One, as a journalist who sometimes picks pictures for our articles and our podcasts at The Spectator, beautiful women just generally do better. People prefer to see beautiful women as opposed to, I don't know, in this case, an abstract BMI chart or, I don't know, fat cells or something like that.
I guess the thing it would normally be is like a bulging out of focus belly, right? That's what you get in the British press, isn't it, when they don't want to shame someone? Yeah,
nobody wants to see that. I mean, Olly, there's a fine line. I mean, there's a spectrum, isn't it? On the one hand, you've got clickbait. On the other end, you've just got, you're just going to sell your article in the most attractive way possible. No one wants to see a fat, naked belly on their Twitter. I mean, maybe you do, Olly, but I certainly don't. So I can definitely see the editorial decision that led to having this beautiful woman on this article. This thing about without consent, her picture is on Getty, which is a image storage site, where photographers sell their pictures to Getty. Journalists like me, we have a subscription, we download the pictures. The women and the men involved in these pictures, they don't own the pictures. And that's why you see, even actresses like Megan Fox on Instagram, as I do follow her, she'll have Getty watermarks on pictures of her own. I mean, we can talk about ownership and whether or not that's fair, whether or not as an actress you should be able to own your pictures. But this thing about no consent is not quite right, because it wasn't her picture. That is a Getty picture, and The Economist got it from there. So there's no legal problem there. I do think, though, just to push back on Leif, I think the article was absolutely interesting. So many different factors considered that I hadn't quite thought of: cultural, dietary, biological. But at the end, it does say, when it comes to weight gain, alas, in the Arab world, or indeed anywhere else, that is hardly the road to good health, or let alone happiness, which does suggest that to be overweight is to be unhealthy, is to be unhappy. which I think that's the line that let them down, because throughout the article, it was very even-handed, saying, this is just pretty factual. But at the end, there was a value judgment. And I think that's the thing that really, as Abdul points out, there are people in the West like Lizzo who are pretty overweight, and people talk about her in terms of body positivity rather than anything else.
I suppose the difference is, Abdul, that Lizzo talks about it herself, doesn't she, in her music and in her interviews, whereas very clearly from her reaction, Anas Taleb had no desire to be seen as part of this debate, or even that it was a debate at all. She sees herself as a serious actor and can't believe, basically, this is what this legal suit's been triggered by, isn't it? Can't believe that the one time she gets picked up by the Western press, it's to talk about her curves.
It's to talk about her curves, to talk about her picture, and to get back to Cindy's point that she does not own her photo here because it's owned by Getty. That's totally fine. At least if the main photo of your article is the subject of the main photo in an article is not happy about it, and this is a very famous person, at least you would apologize. At least you would choose a different one. At least you would. It's unethical to use people's photo without if they're not happy with their representation. To use someone's photo without, and this is the same principle that people from a father of the Sandy Hook school shooting use in order to take down the video of footage of people that put photos of his son in a lot of conspiracy theories. They said they do not own them. This is not him, and they do not have permission to do that. And he was not happy with the representation of his son.
But he's a public figure because he was murdered in a horrible way. It's different if you put yourself forward as a public figure, isn't it? We'd all agree it would be okay, fair game for presidents and politicians. So it's a question as ever. It comes back to all the stuff that was kind of investigated in the Leveson inquiry, doesn't it, Leif? It's kind of like, at what point does someone who does a job which people see and is glamorous have a public life, as opposed to just anyone else doing their job? Is being an actor different to being a bricklayer, or is it different to being a politician? Where is it?
Yeah, I think if you kind of take that principle too far, you get to a point where, no newspapers would be able to illustrate any story with a silly cutout of a celebrity, and our papers would look quite, dour without that. Maybe that would be better for our culture, but I'm not convinced that would be a great thing for, reader engagement. They would probably, if they were always having to click on extremely dull kind of clipboard art, illustrated pieces, maybe they wouldn't be reading about these things in the first place as much as they are now.
I just think, she's someone who puts herself in the public sphere. This picture looks like it was taken when she was doing some kind of catwalk on a play, or she's on stage regardless. This is a publicly accessible imagery that she's putting out there. Some photographer's taken it, and it's completely legal and above board for Getty to own that. I don't think we could get into a situation where journalists have to ask every single permission for every single picture, or apologize when the person involved is not happy about it. As Leif says, we wouldn't do this for politicians. Celebrity magazines are full of pictures of celebrities not looking very good on a day off, and where would we get to? I think fundamentally, we can look at reforming media law, but in this case, The Economist hasn't done anything wrong in this sense.
But Sandy, she's not a politician. This is the problem. She's not a politician. She's an actress minding her own business, living in Iraq, living in her own country, and then to be picked up by one of the biggest newspapers in the West and put in as an example that fat is a very bad problem in Arabic countries, which it is, by the way. No one is denying that we have obesity problem, but to be put as the face of this issue without her permission, without anyone going, asking her, this is mind-boggling.
But it does happen here all the time, doesn't it? Curvier women in the public eye. Vanessa Feltz has been appended to 1 million articles about the health of women in Britain, which she's got nothing to do with, just because she's larger than average. And that is part of our culture. I guess the point is, Cindy, that you're talking about an international publication. This is quite sobering for all of us who work for international publications, isn't it? The culture with which it would be read by a subscriber to The Economist online in the UK is clearly, as Abdul is evidencing, very different when it's picked up in the Arab world.
Yeah, that's probably true. Abdul knows much more about that. I don't know what the media culture is in those circumstances. But I don't know if she is really minding her own business when she's one of the most popular faces on Iraqi TV for the last few decades. I do feel like, if I were her, obviously someone's pointing out I've got ample curves. Okay, fine. It's not the most, charming thing. But it says, Iraqis often cite Inaz Taleb, an actress with ample curves, as the ideal of beauty. I would love to be the ideal of beauty. And I just think, I don't know, it does feel like she just needs to take it on the chin a little bit here.
Okay, I'm not going to get into whether or not, Cindy, you are the ideal of beauty. I'm going to get out of this conversation at that point before we get cancelled ourselves.
And the answer is yes.
You're up next after this. Okay, Leaf, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is this the week that people stopped bothering at work?
And let's talk about quiet quitting. I think this is really important to talk about because this is kind of a huge phenomenon that's happening at this moment. And my friend kind of described it as like phase 2 of the Great Resignation. So I wanted to address it not only because it's important for work-life balance and work-life in general, but also in the context of the tech career industry as well.
Japanese YouTuber Sakura speaking about quiet quitting back in April. Leaf, what is quiet quitting?
It's a phenomenon that's become quite popular to kind of make videos about and talk about on social media that involves workers who are feeling really checked out of their jobs and don't want to quit because they still want the paycheck, but they've decided to basically withdraw all kind of spiritual involvement, I would say, by putting in absolutely zero effort and doing the bare minimum that's required. So really keeping the borders of their job sort of firm. And it seems to be taking off, across the Western world.
Okay. So it's similar because we've talked on the show before about all the different quests to have a better work-life balance that we've been seeing over the past few years due to the pandemic. We've talked about the Great Resignation, which Sakura was referencing there in their clip. We've talked about people moving to Barbados with their laptops. This is none of that. This isn't, I want to make my life better, I want to change of direction, I want to work from home. This is carry on doing your job, carry on taking the paycheck, but just do as little work as possible.
Yeah, and I think why I'm interested in it is that I think it's a profoundly sad story at root. I think it shows, particularly when it seems to be popular among younger people, a total degree of disenfranchisement from the economy. And some young people feel like everything is stacked against them, and no matter how hard they work, they will never be able to get the kind of job that they like. And so there's a sort of focus on the time that you spend with your friends outside work, because really what your life now isn't really about work, because work will never bring you this kind of stability and the fulfillment you're seeking.
And for people who see this as a bit of a Western phenomenon, Cindy, worth noting it started in China, didn't it?
Yep. In China, it's called tamping, which is lie flat, which is a pretty colourful way of just describing essentially what you're doing. Some people stay in their jobs, but what it requires is basically you just don't move on with your life. So you don't have relationships, you don't get married, you don't move out of your parents' house. You just do enough to get by. And as Leaf says, it's a reaction to what they see as the cards stacked against them. In China, life can be very hard. There's rising cost of living crisis there as well, rising house prices, record youth unemployment, as well as generally just a very, very competitive life, which I think probably comes from, the kind of tiger parenting in school life, just graduating into the workplace where everyone is incredibly competitive, such that Chinese friends say to me, "Oh, you're so lucky to be working in the UK because there's no scheming going on in the office." Little do they know. But the point is that I don't know what the hard stats are, but this has become such a prevalent notion for people to draw on. It's become an adjective for people to talk about, that even President Xi has said, young people, please don't tamping, please don't lie flat. We need you in the economy. So the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is worried.
It's so interesting, Cindy, because it's so different to the stereotype we have of young Chinese people who are always, academically ahead of their global peers and who are being hothoused to join the work environment and work every minute of their lives. It's obviously a bit of a rebellion against
It's like
that.
Diogenes living in a barrel. That's basically how I think about it. But of course, there will be the vast majority of people who are not doing that. And for them, the adjective to describe them is called 内卷, which is basically to just compete on this rat race where even though everyone is competing more and more, no one's getting more reward out of it. So just it's basically, you're on the treadmill, you're not going anywhere. And so there are a lot of people who don't lie flat who are actually doing this other thing as well.
There was a great piece in the Times on Thursday from a self-proclaimed quiet quitter that I read. And he was basically saying, Abdul, for a previous generation, when there were union rules and pensions and less competition for jobs, doing the job description and nothing more was the job description. What is now called quiet quitting is just doing your job. It's just not doing 110%. It's not answering your emails in the evening. It's not sacrificing your social life. But that's what previous generations have done, for decades.
I find this quiet quitting awesome thing to do, because if you're not feeling appreciated, if you don't feel that you're contributing to something, but you really need the money because there's a very bad welfare system, then why not doing it? And I know a couple of people who've been doing this for like a year now, since last year, because they're not happy about their jobs. They're not happy with their director. They're not happy with they're not getting rewarded. They feel like they did everything they needed to do, but then the management, for example, rewards the yes man, the person who, as you said, goes answer their emails on the weekend, which is not healthy. And according to there was a survey by Gallup. It's a company that surveyed like almost 170,000 people in 140 countries, and they saw that there's a lot of roots for this problem. One of them is that only 21% of the 170,000 people said that they feel rewarded at work. They were engaged at work, and they're not being rewarded. And if they're not engaged, they're not being rewarded, they're not going to really continue going the extra mile for you.
But it's younger people, isn't it, Cindy, that are really embracing this, which to older people listening, particularly employers, will be seen as symptomatic of their generation's inability to kind of, pull up their socks and get on with it. Everyone didn't like their jobs for decades and carried on doing those jobs. And now those people, baby boomers and Gen X, are employers. They've got to understand the whole kind of work culture, the empathetic style of management that millennial and Gen Z employees have come to expect. Isn't this just another hard hurdle for them to overcome? I'm running a small business, and I've got to anticipate that, my employees might be dialing it in because they're not happy enough.
I think if your employees are not happy enough, then you as an employer have a direct causal link to that. You could do things that make it better for them. Obviously, for some people, the job is just never going to be right. But if you're a small business owner and your employees are not happy, then actually you can help that a lot, because you are, the vast majority of their interactions and where they get their morale from, we're at work here, we're going on a work virtual reality game next week, that kind of team bonding exercises. But it is sad, I think, fundamentally, as Leaf said, because people should enjoy work. And here's my Chineseness coming out here. Because I think, you should want to do what you spend majority of your time doing. You should find fulfillment from that, find rewards from that. And if you're not doing that, then I think you should just quit.
But there are some jobs that no one is going to love, aren't there? I mean, again, this example of this article that I read in the Times, the guy was saying he worked for a high street bank doing their advertising. And it wasn't that he hated it. It was like there was no value to the world in his view by generating this content. And you have to be honest, any graduate who is in that position would probably feel the same. Like, objectively, you're not helping the world.
Yes, no, I take your point, Ollie, but I will say, and this is completely anecdotal, for a time after university, I worked in Lidl, and my store manager in that store, having that store was all he ever wanted. He doesn't want to go any higher in the hierarchy. He lives across the road from his house. He's got a few kids. He loves his team. He loves his customers. He was the most happy guy I've ever come across in a workplace. And that's all he wanted. And he had got to this moment through hard work, and he didn't want to go any further. So I don't know. I feel like you would have to do a poll, because I think, there are people who do, you find the perfect thing. You do just want to keep at it.
I should say to our in-house corporate lawyer, if you are listening to this before release, I value your time and your judgment. Leaf, have you ever dialed it in? Be honest. Have you ever done a job where you just even just for a day or two?
Leaf, I did think this is a brave choice for you, considering you're on a podcast with your employer.
I know, and actually, I wanted to cover it partly because my dear editor Caroline Law has written about it in the magazine this week. So, she really brought the issue to my attention. conversation. But yes, no, I have dialed it in at work when I've been kind of focusing on projects outside of the office.
Okay, getting a plug for the magazine as well. That's going the extra 20% Leaf right there. You're not quietly quitting.
Thank you so much. Not yet. But yes, no, I mean, I've definitely decided that, there have been moments in my career when I've thought, look, I seem to be working the whole time and slightly neglecting my social life or my life outside of work, in terms of creatively writing stuff. And so I want to rebalance. And I think that's perfectly understandable. A lot of people, can I say, do this as well when they have families. They kind of, they draw up barriers. And we don't generally give them grief for that. So the idea that I'm slightly resentful of the idea that young people are being so lazy just by deciding that they want to keep their sort of out of work life pretty sacrosanct. Whereas older people, when they do that because they're caring for their parents who are aging or their children who are young and require care, they don't get the same kind of reaction.
Well, I think it's time to quietly quit this show today. I think we can all agree that we've done the bare minimum that's expected of us. My thanks to Leaf, to Abdul, and to Cindy for their stories. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tap follow. Remember to check out our sister show from the week, The Overview. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer, Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.